Joe Gideon's morning routine and all that jazz is to listen to classical music, plop Visine into his eyes, swallow some Alka-Seltzer and some Dexedrine. Then he's ready to rock. Obviously, that wasn't a smart habit to get into because the dude has multiple heart attacks and dies at the end of the movie. Bev, you will never, ever guess what suggestion I have for this character about what he should have used to start his morning.
What could it be?
You're going to say it for me this time.
Is it Spark Plug Coffee?
That is correct. Drop some of Spark Plug Coffee's premium quality beans into a mug and enjoy the best coffee you've ever made. Not only will you be brewing with the best, this stuff is better than takeout, and it'll also cost you less than buying it every day will. So it's convenient to have a bag in your cupboard, but it's also more affordable. Sparkplug delivers to the front door of Canadians and Americans. Check this out, you hoofers. Canadians don't have to pay for the shipping costs, and people from both countries should join the Autopilot Coffee Club. Pause or even flat out cancel anytime you want, especially if you're about to die and just don't need any kind of subscriptions at all anymore. Find your new favorite at sparkplug.coffee. Make it sparkplug.coffee/HYES. And that HYES promo code will get you a one-time 20% discount. Well, it is showtime, folks. 5, 6, 7, 8. Bev, get the man to hit that music.
And action! Have you ever seen
All That Jazz? Hi, good people of the cyber world, and thank you for giving our podcast a shot. As all of them are, Have You Ever Seen episode number 627 will be laden with spoilers about the classic movie in question. I'm the man in black whose morning routine is nothing like what Roy Scheider does to himself in this movie. Not even wearing black, actually. Ryan Ellis. And here's the lady who would probably be happy to put on a show-stopping performance with my daughter. If I had a daughter, my wife, Bev.
That's me.
Those two can sing and they can, like, do they sing? They dance for sure. I guess they sing.
They play a song. That's right. They're just dancing.
Okay.
Maybe they sing along. Gosh, I can't remember.
It's been almost a week since we saw this, so some of it's already faded from my memory. Okay, the coming attractions trivia for All That Jazz. It's a simple yes or no. Is the song All That Jazz in the movie All That Jazz?
It's not. False advertising.
Interestingly...
flagrant false advertising.
Man, that was flagrant false advertising. Interestingly, it's the first song we get in the 2002 Chicago, that Rob Marshall directed, which has ties to this film. And both Catherine Zeta-Jones and Renee Zellweger sing it. But it's not actually performed in All That Jazz at all. And All That Jazz from Chicago was 98th on AFI's Top 100 Songs. So I'm not really sure why that wasn't in this movie when it's called that. And it came from the musical that he'd made 4 years before this movie came out. Bob Fosse, of course. I haven't said his name yet, the director.
The musical choices in this movie are super interesting because it's quite the pastiche of different styles and the mishmash.
And look at the last song they used. They adapt Bye Bye Love into Bye Bye Life.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty dark. Well, obviously, it's a dark way to end this movie. The whole thing's dark. Okay, DJ Jazzy Joe was released by Columbia. I hope I was going to get a laugh. No Fresh Prince involved here. Was released by Columbia Pictures and 20th Century Fox on December 20th, 1979. So we're talking about a 45-year-old film, or will be in less than a month, and Bob Fosse's Flicker show did well. It went on to triple its budget at the box office. But our foster dog is all worked up over there. Probably going to hear her make noise if you haven't already. And Bev, the movie is almost as old as you. I can't even remember what it was like to be young and new, although I think you can. The movie can't. But please remind us what we're talking about by giving us the skinny on All That Jazz.
Jazz. Roy Scheider is Joe Gideon, a legendary Broadway choreographer and a filmmaker, burning the candle at both ends. In order to finish editing a film while also launching a new musical, Joe relies on drugs, alcohol, and chain smoking to work night and day, never giving an inch on his impossibly high standards. He struggles to find time with his adoring daughter, but does manage to carve out an evening to cheat on his girlfriend with one of his dancers. Everything catches up with him with an ill-timed heart attack that almost kills him and sets off a fever dream of reflections on his life and legacy.
He's like, what is his name, Llewellyn in The Simpsons, the play director. I have directed 3 plays and had 4 heart attacks. He has something like 4 at the end of this movie.
Yeah,
it's definitely more than 1 or 2.
Which is also what ultimately took out Bob Fosse like less than a decade after this movie was
87.
made.
He was only 60, around 60 when he died. And he also had a heart attack when he was making or editing Lenny.
Yeah.
Which is what this movie's the stand-up. But Lenny, the movie that Dustin Hoffman was in. And he was trying to get Chicago off the ground. Was it Chicago? It was called Chicago.
It was Chicago.
Yeah, the mid-70s play that became the movie 25 years later. There's a dog making noise. You don't know what she's doing. Maybe it fits with this movie.
I guess getting spayed doesn't stop her from wanting certain things, because she is...
Pornhub, we have a new entry for you.
This particular foster dog is a real pervert. But you're right, it's appropriate for the movie.
Anyway, a nutshell for this film. Broadway producers make $500,000 by not putting on a show.
They make more money if he dies by a certain time.
Mm-hmm. And he does, I believe, die in time, doesn't he? Or on time. It seems that way.
Conveniently.
It's like that line in one of my favorite movies. I'll be watching it in less than a month. It's a Wonderful Life. You're worth more dead than alive. Because of George's insurance policy, that's what Mr. Potter says to him. I can save my family, at least, if I kill myself. Wow. Yeah, that's a tough one there. It's almost like The Producers, too, which was a joke. The movie that you didn't like very much.
What's the line? Where did we go right?
I heard the wrong cast, the wrong script, and the wrong something else. Where did I go right? That's in The Producers. All right, there's a lot of numbers here. You can jump in when you want to contribute to this, but here we go. Rotten Tomatoes. 87% of critics like the film. 41 fresh, 6 rotten. The average is 7.6 out of 10. And 85% of audiences. Apparently Stanley Kubrick loved it. The best he'd ever seen, best movie he'd ever seen at that point.
Wow.
Really? You think so? Okay. Siskel and Ebert liked it, but it wasn't on either top 10 list. But they both had hair on their top 10. In fact, Siskel had it number 1.
Ha!
And Siskel gave it a pretty decent rave on the show, apparently, but Ebert didn't. He actually flat out didn't like it, but then changed his mind later on. He said he was comparing it too much to 8.5.
Yeah, which is a fair comparison.
Which it is comparable to, yeah. Bob Fosse only directed 5 films, and they range from 81% fresh to 91% fresh. The worst reviews he ever got is still 81%. Cabaret outdoes this. We covered that years ago, and Lenny is pretty close to this. This was 17th at the 79 U.S. box office. Kramer vs. Kramer was number 1. The Amityville Horror was number 2. I just covered that about a month ago. And Apocalypse Now was number 6. Probably the 2 biggest rivals for Best Picture with Kramer vs. Kramer were Apocalypse and all that jazz. Fosse's flick shared the Palme d'Or with Kagamusha, I guess that's how you say that, at the 1980 Cannes Film Festival. That is a Kurosawa picture. This film won 4 Oscars. One of them I thought should have gone to Apocalypse Now. The first one I'm going to mention, Alan Hymes' editing. It is great editing, but I always felt like Apocalypse Now was robbed for that. Albert Wolski's costumes won. The sets by 4 guys won. I didn't write their names down. And Ralph Burns' original song score and its adaptation or best adaptation score. What? That's what the category was back then. It's changed many times over the years. The various music score Oscars. It was nominated for 5 more and didn't win them. Best Picture, Fosse for Best Director, but he won for Cabaret. Interestingly, again, competing with Coppola, Apocalypse Now, all that jazz. And in 72, it was the first Godfather film, and Cabaret. Roy Scheider, Best Actor, was nominated. The original screenplay by Fosse and Robert Allen Arthur, and also Giuseppe Rotuno. One of the guys who won for the set said his name. I wrote it down. What's the pronunciation? It is... He said Rotuno, so he was nominated for the cinematography. Kramer vs. Kramer won 3 of the big ones this was nominated for, picture, director, and actor, because Hoffman won for Best Actor. I watched the Oscar speeches, and they were pretty boilerplate, but you only could see 2 of them. It was just the art direction, set decoration, one, and then the editing by Alan Hymes. The other 2 weren't available on YouTube that I could find. But for some reason, I thought, I want to see what Roy Scheider looks like at the Oscars. He was nominated for French Connection, but he wasn't there. Neither was Pacino, and neither was Sellers. They were all nominated against Hoffman and Jack Lemmon. The only 2 people that were there were Lemmon and Hoffman. And, of course, Hoffman won that year.
That was back when it was much less of a given that people would show up for the Oscars. If they were busy, they just didn't go.
A little less common, though, for people in Best Actor category. And it was usually English people that would skip it more often than not, or if somebody was protesting, like George C. Scott had earlier in the 70s. This film was inducted into the National Film Registry in 2001, along with Jaws, Manhattan, Planet of the Apes, and The Sound of Music. We've covered all of those. And Hoosiers went in that year, too. The Gene Hackman movie I covered with Chris on Scoring at the Movies. This was 14th on AFI's Top 25 Musicals. Singin' in the Rain was number 1, as it should have been. And the 1954 A Star is Born, not the Cooper one from a few years ago, how could it be? But that was 7th, and I just covered that 10 days ago. And the last thing I'll mention are the AFI nominations. It was up for the Top 100 Songs, the on-Broadway song we hear at the beginning, the Top 100 Quotes with Joe Gideon's recurring, "It's Showtime." On the line it says just "It's Showtime," not "It's Showtime, folks." He's always saying folks, whatever. And the 1998 and 2007 AFI Top 100s.
On Broadway originated in this movie?
It must have been because, oh no, not necessarily. Where original songs were nominated for the Top 100 Songs list for the AFI. In fact, All That Jazz, I told you made the list. That wasn't original. In Chicago, it wasn't original. It was from the stage, so I guess not. All right, then, long build-up. I think you've seen this movie before. What'd you think of it this time?
Yeah, the first time I saw it was a couple of years ago. I had no idea what I was in for then, and I really couldn't even process it while I was watching it. It caught me so much by surprise. So it is great to revisit it. It's definitely better with a second viewing. I don't know that I love it necessarily, but I do think it's a great work of art. We're going to compare it a lot to 8.5, and that's totally fair, but I still think it stands alone as completely, thrillingly unique.
What is unique? It's obviously quite dark. I can live with that, but I said this when I did A Star is Born recently. When it comes to musicals, I'm a guy who likes to have fun with them. And this isn't really a musical either. That's the thing. A Star is Born wasn't, and neither is this, in the sense of we're just sitting here talking about the weather, and then we break out into good morning, good morning. To me, that's a musical, and obviously Nashville and all that jazz. And A Star is Born, I think all the versions of A Star is Born, it's not that kind of film. They sing in context. These people are singing and dancing for each other, but mostly on stages, like in A Star is Born.
Is Cabaret a musical? Cabaret, every song is diegetic, right?
That's another one I put in that category, yeah. So I guess I'm being a little bit too particular about that, but the movie is not at all fun, and that's fine that that's the case. You could say that's true about Apocalypse Now as well, and even Kramer versus Kramer is a very serious movie. I don't love the movie. I've seen it 2 or 3 times. I think Roy Scheider's a terrific actor, but maybe he's not the best casting for this kind of character. I think he does a good job considering. You don't like the casting at all by looking at your face.
No, I am shocked by your statement. I think he's perfect.
Oh, you think he's great? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't see him, even after seeing the movie so many times and knowing he was in this movie. All these years I've known that. It almost seems like a surprise to me every time I watch it. Richard Dreyfuss apparently was, I think, in the role. And then, of course, he has the connection with Scheider from Jaws. But then he dropped out. I guess he could be very fickle back in those days. He'd won the Oscar. Maybe he thought, like, oh, I can do whatever the hell I want to do.
That's a very challenging part. He pulls off seeming convincingly like a dancer, even though he's not.
And he sings at the end, too. He apparently, in his career, had sung and danced and something else before, but not at the same time. And he does those things a lot, at the very end anyway. I just think he's strange casting, though. Maybe that's part of the problem. Young Joe, by the way, is Keith Gordon. Speaking of Jaws, he was in Jaws, too, with Scheider.
Oh, wow.
Has some scenes with him, I guess. Not really very many, but he's one of the actors in that. He became a director. I think he's directed one of these actors in his entire career. He's the main kid, the main character in Christine as well, the horror movie about the car. What about his routine? He does this the same every day. I did appreciate that. I don't know if I really have a routine that's the same every morning. I always have to get some water and some ice in it, so I guess it's a routine. I shower every single day. Yeah, okay, but things I put in my body is just basically water and a toothbrush. Yeah. That's all that goes in my body till I eat something. But he plays Vivaldi. He has a cigarette in the shower. We see that more than once. He's smoking in the shower. You know you're hooked on smoking when you came and get it out of your mouth for 5-10 minutes when you're getting wet.
To take a shower.
Yep.
I used to smoke. I quit a very long time ago. But if I ever have the temptation to start again, I'll just watch this movie. Because every time he smokes a cigarette with it hanging out of his mouth, it makes me want to take a shower. It makes smoking look so repulsive. Every single one of those rooms must have been disgusting.
And because this is based on Fosse's life, he apparently was or had been a 5-pack-a-day smoker.
What?
And I guess after the heart attack, he cut back a little bit. People still said, what are you doing smoking, considering all these factors? And at that point, he was only in his mid-40s, I guess, in the late mid-70s, whatever it was. I think it was mid-70s. He was around 40-something, 45. I've cut back a little bit on the smoking. So the character again now, and this is probably what Bob Fosse did too, but Joe takes Dexedrine, which apparently is for ADHD. I think it says that on the bottle.
Speed, basically.
Or I looked it up. That's where I saw that. Yeah, he's taking speed every day. I guess that stuff works quickly, and that's the idea, that even if he feels terrible and hungover, which he probably almost always does, he's always smoking and drinking in this, not just
staying
smoking.
Up all night, working.
And working so much. The movie is being edited at night, and he's working on the musical during the day. But he does have the line, too, that is also in Rounders, life is on the wire, the rest is just waiting. Damon says that about Papa Wallenda, apparently said that.
So Papa Wallenda, when this movie came out, he had just died, falling off a tightrope.
Right, that's how he died.
Just about a year before this movie was made. It's a quote from a man who died doing what he loved and insisted that it's more important than life.
I should like this movie more for that reason alone at this point in my life, being a little older than this character is, maybe 5 years old or something like that. Because I'm not doing what I love for my career, not even close. So I should appreciate when somebody is. And if you go out that way, Sammy Davis Jr., Bill Maher said, give me 60 Sammy years and I'd be happy. I forget what happened to him, why he died, but if he had a happy life, and I think he did, apart from obviously the racism he would have dealt with in America, he's right. That's not bad.
Do you think that Joe Gideon is content?
No, I don't think he'd live like this if you're content. But then again, when he's in the hospital, and he should be recovering and resting and doing all those things, and certainly not smoking and partying and drinking like he is in the hospital, he's enjoying himself, at least doing that. Now,
or
maybe
is
he's
he just
compensating.
chasing the demons away? I don't really think he's happy. I think
I don't think he's happy.
His workaholism, his drug abuse, alcohol abuse, his womanizing,
but he's doing what he loves.
What anybody now would call like a sex addiction. He's doing what he's obsessed with. He's compelled to do in an almost compulsive way. I wouldn't say his relationship to his work is remotely healthy. And I think it's probably like a lot of greatest people have very unhealthy relationships with their work. You have to be obsessed, especially in a field like this, to get as good as he was.
Either one of these fields.
Absolutely, and he's great at both of them.
Broadway and directing.
That obsession comes from... It's a coping mechanism. He can't stand the silence. That's why he can't rest in the hospital. Because he can't cope with his own thoughts and just living in his own skin.
But I stand by my point that if somebody can even pretend that they're having fun, that's better than a lot of people's lives.
I understand that it means that we get movies like this and Cabaret and his incredible stage work. He's an immeasurably influential person, especially in the theater. His style of dance is so distinctive. It's totally important. If you think about Broadway in the 70s, you're going to think about Bob Fosse. And I love Bob Fosse. I love the Bob Fosse dance. I loved Cabaret. I love Chicago. You and I always disagree about this. You think the work, the output is worth whatever you have to put yourself through to get there.
I don't think it is.
I disagree.
I don't have the kind of job where that's...
There's lots of people who do great work and have normal, healthy relationships, can go to sleep at night, don't have to use drugs and alcohol to get through day to day. But there is this conflation, right? It's the great man trope. God knows we've seen our share of films about great, difficult men. A good recent example would be Oppenheimer, which we just covered, and of course won the Oscar last year and made almost $1 billion. Probably most of the people listening to this podcast saw it. But there's countless biopics where you have a man who's so talented and smart and driven, but also he abuses the people around him, but he abuses himself the most, and in the end we must simply marvel anyway because that great man does a great thing. The world loves him for it, and we all have to question whether the suffering justifies the art or science or the athletic feat, whatever it is that he's great for. But I will say part of what I like about all that jazz is I think it kind of transcends that trope. Because he has this level of self-awareness, maybe because he's making a movie about himself. Yeah. So he doesn't lionize his own work at all. That's the difference between him and any of these other great man pictures I would be talking about. We never see the hero moment. We don't see the play open and become an iconic, timeless hit, which we know it does. Chicago still plays all the time. We don't see audiences lining up around the block to see the stand-up. We only see the suffering. We come close to seeing the success, at least of his film, but it's immediately overshadowed by his obsession with one bad review. Yeah. So Fosse's really hard on himself. The women in his life are full of grace and seem to forgive him everything, but he doesn't forgive himself. I think he's making an argument. Yes, he needs to live this way. He chooses to live this way. And he seems to be wide-eyed walking into death knowing that he's causing it himself and that he would rather just let his coping mechanisms kill him than meet his demons. But I don't think that he's trying to make the argument to the audience that this is a way to live. He never is making the argument, well, my output as an artist makes my sacrifice worth it.
Maybe part of why I don't really latch on to this movie is because I saw it for the first time maybe 20 years ago, could have been a little bit more. But even at that point, I'd seen so many movies that were sort of like this. Enough like this, well, here's another one. Like you said, the great man trope, who suffers for his soup, if you will. You suffer for your soup, soup Nazi. And it didn't feel like it was all that different than them. And back to the point, it wasn't that much fun. But I guess I have to forgive it for that, because it would have come out before a lot of those movies did. And what you just said is a very good point. Maybe it's not as simple as what I was saying there. I still don't know why I don't latch onto it. I don't really love any of Fosse's stuff. Star 80 is about an important topic. It's about the death of Dorothy Stratton. That's her name, I think. The boyfriend that killed her brutally, horrible guy that he was. That was the last film he made, I think. Sweet Charity, I think I saw. I believe I did. Shirley MacLaine. I think that was the first movie he ever made. Cabaret. I've never loved Cabaret. That was the second movie. Then it was... I think I wrote them all down. Let's see. What did he do? I'll get it in order here. So Sweet Charity in the late 60s. Cabaret in 72. Lenny in 74. There you go. Star 80 was the last movie, and this was in 79. I like Lenny the most of all those by a mile, but even that's not a movie I watch very often. Mm-hmm. It's mostly because Hoffman and Valerie Perrine, I think is her name, are terrific together, and he does a great job playing Lenny Bruce.
What about his work as a choreographer, the Fosse style?
It's impressive. Obviously, we're looking at that in Chicago. I always mention the musicals I love the most, and they're usually fun and funny. Sing in the Rain, Wizard of Oz, Hairspray from 2007. And I should never forget to include Chicago, because that's certainly on my short list, too, for my favorite musicals. And as dark as that movie is, it's also funny. And you're right, he's tied to that, even though he didn't make it. He was long dead. Rob Marshall directed it, and Harvey Weinstein produced it. It had nothing to do with Bob Fosse, except it did at the same point. So I don't know. I'm going on and on here. Why I don't latch onto it, but I didn't love. There you go. I guess that's what it is. I didn't really love any of this guy's work. And I guess maybe there's a part of me that was always annoyed that he won Best Director over Coppola for the Cabaret movie. I think of his two musical movies, Cabaret and this is definitely better. I'm doing what Ebert did. I'm holding something against him that shouldn't be held against him. Ebert was holding against him that this was his version of 8.5. Many people have made an 8.5 in some way or another. And this is more honest and out there, maybe not more honest, but more out there about his own foibles and problems than even 8.5 was about Fellini.
Yeah.
Because this really is Joe, or not Joe, but Bob, apparently. It looks like it is.
According to his editor,
Alan Heim,
who does the commentary on the Criterion, he said that when he was in the edit suite with him, he's like, obviously this movie's about him in every single way, but Fosse would be like, but it's not me. He still had this remove from Joe Gideon as a character.
Yeah, okay.
And everyone's like, obviously it's you. There's so many connections. The actress who plays his girlfriend, Anne Ranking?
I didn't look up the pronunciation.
Okay, she's a very big deal in the dance world. I don't think she was in a ton of movies, but she was a big shot dancer. I read that the actress who plays his daughter, who's only ever in this film, basically the whole thing for her of being in this movie was just that she got to do a dance with Anne Ranking. Anyways, that was Fosse's real girlfriend.
Okay, right.
He made her audition because he's Bob Fosse and because he really is Joe Gideon. This is just how much it's about his real life. The girl who plays his daughter is the same age his daughter was when he had the heart attack. Leland Palmer, who plays his, what's her name? Audrey. She is supposed to be
Gwen Verdon.
That's it. Famously,
You've seen
his ex-wife.
that
I have
series.
not.
Oh, I thought you did see that one.
I don't know.
Yeah, he was married to Gwen Verdon for 27 years. And he was married to other people, I believe, but he was with her for that long, quarter of a century.
Well, they were married for that long because they never divorced.
Oh, okay, maybe he wasn't with her that
yeah.
long. All right, I didn't read that part. Yeah, the Fosse-Verdon thing was Sam Rockwell plays Fosse, and we just talked about Sam Rockwell last week on Galaxy Quest. And then it's Michelle Williams.
Yeah.
People did rave about it. If you hear noises now, it's not the dog, it's my stomach. We ate dinner, I don't know why
It could also be the dog. She's sighing up a storm over here after her little tryst.
Not farts. It's something else. My gut's making noises. And by the way, the play that he's putting on within this is NYLA. NY/LA.
And the whole musical number is about flying, so I guess the idea is it's supposed to be the flight between New York and LA. Everybody who's in entertainment probably knows that flight very well because they go back and forth so much.
Sometimes people do that in the span of a week. They might make 2 movies or do a play and a movie, and they'll do one of the things on the weekend, the other thing on a weekday, and they'll fly to different places, maybe even overseas to do that. By the way, the thing about self-awareness, you could argue that all the scenes with Jessica Lange, who is Angelique, the Angel of Death, and only her second movie, by the way. Her first was King Kong, the one in 1976, and then she didn't make another one for 3 years. I don't know if she was on Broadway herself or what it was. She obviously had the looks, and she was a talented woman. She won 2 Oscars.
She's beautiful in this movie.
Anyway, we see her a lot in the movie. Not constantly. She doesn't speak that much, but we see her, I shouldn't say a lot. It's just sprinkled throughout. And you could argue, well, does he just have this vision of death all the time, so therefore he is very self-aware of what he's doing to himself? But you could also argue that everything with her is just a flash at the very end of his life. That it's just sprinkled throughout that because that's the way it's done in this movie. Who's to say? No one knows if there's an angel of death that meets you. And it could be like a dream. That happens, and yet in your mind, 3 days pass in your dream, but it's a microsecond. I don't know.
But it's a great device. Maybe a little on-the-nose device, just in case he worried the audience wasn't going to get it. But he lies to everybody in his life. He lies to his producers. He lies to his coworkers. He certainly lies to every single woman in his life, his daughter, his girlfriend, his ex-wife. But he doesn't ever lie to Angelique. That's the place where he tells the truth. And she says, did you love him? Well, I don't know if I say I love you all the time. And he has all these little insights that are completely without ego, really stripping it bare and being honest. And then it makes you think, too, he's saying this to her. It's in the script. He's in the movie. And his girlfriend's going to see this.
Yeah, true.
Curious thing.
Yeah, Fosse, not
Fosse's girlfriend, who's in the movie.
Real people, yeah.
He's going to see him saying that about her. The stand-in for him.
He would probably say, this is not me, it's a representation of me. 2 things about that, 2 great directors, and I think that one of them really revered the other one, and that's John Huston and Robert Altman. Huston's thing was when he wrote his autobiography, a friend of his said, great book, John, who's it about? So there's somebody who's not being honest about himself. Obviously, not honest at all.
Right. That's like another reason to respect the movie. Who knows how honest he's being, but it's such an unflattering portrait of him.
Yeah, it's true, yeah. The Altman thing, and I believe he really was a big fan of Huston, I think. I don't think Altman loved a lot of people. He can be pretty honest about not liking some of the great directors of all time, but I think he liked him. He used a very similar character to Jessica Lange in his last movie. He didn't know it'd be his last movie, but he had a heart transplant somewhere in the mid-90s, I guess, because he said, I've had this about 10 years. When they gave him the honorary Oscar, the year he made, it came out, I think, a few months later, A Prairie Home Companion. And the device he uses there is Virginia Madsen is a similar character to the Angel of Death in this. And at the very end of the film, spoiler alert, on A Prairie Home Companion, but we've had almost 20 years to see it, she walks into a diner and all the main characters are sitting there. They look at her and they're staring at her almost like, we're all going to die right now. Or it's maybe different times in their life, like in Lost, right? They all don't die then, but she's coming from them at some point. And great casting there too, because Lang's beautiful in this movie, but Virginia Madsen in that movie is a 12 out of 10. She was so perfect in the mid-2000s. So there you go. I think that's an homage to this movie. That's an homage to 8.5. At the end, look at them all dancing at 8.5. And that circus type thing, people that shouldn't be there, including the younger characters, the younger versions of the main characters we have. Why are they there? Because this is a dream, or it could be that the guy's died and he's just imagining all these people. Look at the end of all that jazz. He has a chance to say goodbye and shake hands and kiss people and hold them and hug them, all that kind of stuff. Instead, in reality, he's laying on a hospital bed and has been there for a while. He's had all these heart attacks. They've cut him open and he doesn't get to say goodbye to very many people at all. Maybe he said goodbye at some point to the people that matter the most, but not to all these other people we see, like in that 8.5 way at the very end.
For a man who lived and breathed dance, he's going to experience all these last moments, all these thoughts he has about his biggest relationships in his life. His last thoughts, as he knows he's dying, is the most important people in his life singing and dancing about him. And it's all about his relationship with his ex, his relationship with his girlfriend, his relationship with his daughter. There's no dance about his films or his plays or his style of dance, his choreography, that's not on his mind when he's dying. We know that those are the things that got in the way of his relationship with these people and that he's dying full of regrets. Well, regrets, but love. It's a very interesting mood because they love him and they're being really honest about his shortcomings and what they did to him. And he's sorry about what he did, but there's that heaven-like, well, none of this matters anymore. Let bygones be bygones. We love each other, and he can go to his grave satisfied about that. I
don't know if I believe in an afterlife, and I don't really believe in heaven, of course, but if there is such a thing, that's one of the things I need to be the most true, is that we can all forgive each other, even if it's somebody that did something really wrong to you, or to all of us. I'd like to think I'd have the ability to be one of those people that would be able to forgive. If maybe we all do. If there is such a thing as an afterlife.
I just need to know that all of my dogs will be there.
We'll see the dogs. Yeah. He's taking 7 months to cut a 90-minute film, which I guess is also based on the whole thing with Lenny. That wasn't a 90-minute film. I think it was closer to 2 hours, I believe. But no wonder he's giving himself a heart attack because he's working every single night doing that and diddling so much with it and making very small changes. Anybody who knows anything about editing realizes that sometimes the smallest thing can make a movie or it's a movie here. But anyway, a song or what have you, podcast, can make it that much better or that much worse. And this is before nonlinear editing.
Any editor watches all that jazz, understanding that it was cut probably on a flatbed, like on a Steinbeck.
Sure, it would have been.
The amount of labor this movie represents of all the back and forth and the fast cutting and going between scenes and the way that they would have absolutely had to experiment with things, see if it works, take it all apart and rebuild it. Every time they go, no, it's too fast paced, or no, actually that VO, I think we used it one too many times. The amount of work it represents to undo something you've done when you have to manually edit like that. I did it in college. I don't know if I could have been an editor if that was the way films were edited when I entered the work world. That makes me think of that with Lenny too, which I haven't seen in this movie. It's called The Stand Up. Spending 7 months in an edit suite, the amount of labor that represents is intense and insane. They don't show it so much in the film. I know that because I just have like insider knowledge. But I think they show it in a way when they're showing the rehearsal in the studio. There's a girl that he's having the affair with, Victoria. He's on her case. Lay back, Victoria. He just can't let it go. Now, me, as a layman, I'm like, she's clearly doing the moves perfectly. I can't see what he sees. But he works it and works it and works it until she gets it right. And that's what he's doing in the edit suite, too. He doesn't care that she's crying. He doesn't care that he's breaking her down. He doesn't care that everybody has to work late, that everybody's sweating through their clothes. They're running out of time. Everything he's doing, he must know consciously is never going to end up on stage because he makes it pornographic. He doesn't like the song and is this act of, rebellion. He just makes it way too sexy to ever be on stage, like literally with nudity and really explicit dancing. The kind of stuff that you're like, I'm surprised you could even get dancers to do this kind of thing. But I'm sure they would do anything for him, because the other thing that's clear is how much these dancers really worship him and would do anything to get in one of his plays.
Well, what's the point, though?
But what is the point of doing all of that work,
Yeah.
all that sweat, all those tears? No one's surprised when the producers, the backers, whatever, are sitting there shaking their heads saying, what a waste.
Contributing to his own stress that he has to know is not going to make his health good.
Yeah.
For unnecessary reasons in this case. If it's
Because
for
he
good reasons.
doesn't like the song, right? He never liked the song from the beginning. They're rolling their eyes. This is too earnest. This is too dumb. This isn't me. And so he turns it into something so aggressively him that it could never end up on stage.
Now, what about On Broadway was good, of course. That's a really good tune. Dun, dun, dun,
Oh, yeah.
dun, 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 dun. That's a good song.
The classic.
But what about the numbers in general? I didn't write everything down. They didn't really stick with me, other than that one. And Bye Bye Life is good, but it's also, as I read on Wikipedia, some critics said, it goes on forever. And I complained about that with A Star is Born, that one sequence in the middle that shows how she starts becoming a star. We get it, and they go on forever. I know it's a musical, but I don't need to have her singing every 2.5 minutes. Mm-hmm. That movie is way too long, and the end of this, I think, is also way too long. Not the whole movie, but the last sequence does beat it to death.
It is so late 70s that I think it sounds corny now. It was probably really out there and fresh at the time it came out.
To do Bye Bye Life?
All the music that's original, even Bye Bye Life, which is based on Bye Bye Love, which is, what, the Everly Brothers?
I forget their names now, but...
Oh, shoot. Okay, anyways.
Doobie Brothers? I don't know.
It's based on a classic pop song from the 60s, but they put that 70s stank on it. The horns and the funk. That whole sound, it just sounds like embarrassingly dated. It's like when you go back and you watch Fight Club or something now and it has that electronic soundtrack that just feels like such 90s club music. And I remember at the time thinking, this is so cool. Oh, we talked about this when we covered Run Lola Run. I love the soundtrack, but it really dates the film because it sounds so of the times. It was very cool when it came out, but now it sounds like mom and dad music.
Bye Bye Love is Everly Brothers.
Oh, I was right. Everly Brothers. So I don't love the music, but I do love the dance sequences. They are exhilarating. They're so surprising. The energy, the bravery of it all. I don't think you felt it, right? Yeah. And that's fair.
No.
It's a taste
I don't know
thing.
why. I should have.
I think in general, I am a bigger sucker for song and dance than you are. As somebody who likes that, even just as casually liking that kind of stuff, I'm blown away by the dancing in this movie. Now, don't love the music. Don't think it's exactly perfect. And you're right. None of these songs really stay with me as I was doing my research and everything. The song that kept getting in my head was All That Jazz. Because that's just a catchier song.
And it's used so well
song.
in Chicago.
Yeah.
And I didn't love Fame at all when I saw that quite a few years ago. That came after this, a year after this. But those songs, well, at least the Fame song, I'm Gonna Live Forever. Who doesn't know that one?
Oh, yeah. Speaking of Fame, on Broadway, and that scene, which goes on for a long time as well. They have to loop it. It's like a solid 6 minutes of this cattle call audition, which, by my understanding, or what I read about it, is very much what those cattle calls really feel like. You watch, and he's on the other side of the cattle call. He's got the smoke hanging out of his mouth. He's callously just going through the dancers, but it's a chore to him, and you can see the hope in their eyes, and you can see the desperation to be picked, to not screw up, to be selected, how it could change their life just to get picked, and he's like, I don't know, do I need a soprano?
Yeah, that's the power that he has, and they're all wannabes.
And once upon a time, he was one of those wannabes, surely.
Oh, yeah, right. And you'd hope that the powerful people remember that they were once that person, too. I don't know how many of them do. Big important character in this movie, not with screen time, he's not in the movie that much, but he wasn't that well known yet either, is John Lithgow. He's Lucas Sargent, and he's based on a real person that apparently had some conflicts with Fosse in reality. He has ideas about what they can do with the play if and when Fosse, there I go, Gideon either dies or is fired. I guess he could have been fired. He probably wouldn't have been fired, so if he does die. And he's basically a backup director. He only has, I think, 2 scenes in the whole film. Lithgow could play a villainous. We know that so much from the 80s, especially in the De Palma movies. And, of course, also in Dexter, the TV show. He could play such a nice guy. We've covered movies like that, Terms of Endearment, even though he's cheating on his wife, but still a nice guy. But then in this, he could play such a great slimeball. But these producers don't have to talk to him. They bring him in. It's not really his fault he's brought in to talk to them. But he's also not saying, I can't do that to Joe. But then again, that's show business for you. Dreyfuss might have been mad that somebody else played this role after him, but you left. Too bad. We got to get somebody. I'm not saying he was. I'm sure actors have been mad before when they either didn't get a part, or they left a part, or they got sick and couldn't do it, and they watch the movie and then they think, oh man, that should have been my thing. Well, whatever the reason was, you didn't do it. Somebody's got to. Mm-hmm. They want to make the film.
And the Lithgow scene brings up something else which is the economics of it, because they say, well, surely you won't do it for the money. He's like, right. How much was it again? And when he doesn't get it, he's like another person who will benefit from Joe dying. Yes. There's these people who are bizarrely rooting for him to die because it'll financially benefit them.
Yeah, this movie wasn't that funny, and I didn't laugh at that, but that's a very dark, funny moment when they're totaling all that up. Mm-hmm. And
with Wallace Shawn, another small part, right. Like a very small part. I think he has one line, which is like, this might be the first movie that makes more money if it never opens. Or, first play.
Right. $500,000 back in the 70s. Wow. By the way, I see it on my notes here, getting back to the way he talks to Angelique about people in his life. He tells Kate he loves her. Katie. It says Kate in the IMDb list, but I guess it's Katie. Anyway, he tells her he loves her. Then there's a hard cut to a scene with Angelique where he says, nah. I wrote down "nah" in quotation marks. Usually that means literally he said that word. So perfect example of him right then in the moment saying, no, don't love you.
A curiously insightful and honest thing to put in your movie.
He also goes through the 5 stages of grief.
Oh, yeah. They keep coming back to that, actually. It's a repeating motif when they take that section from the stand-up.
Yeah.
Which does my pet peeve, where you have a movie about, I think it's a movie, but then a movie about a stand-up comedian who never makes one joke. He rants on stage, but he's never funny once. But
you
the
know
audience
why that
is
is
laughing their heads off.
Because in reality, Lenny Bruce, and they show this in the movie Lenny, yeah, he was a funny guy when he was younger, but he got so political and so mad at the establishment, and he had been arrested in reality, and he did have a drug problem and died, overdosing, I believe is how he died, that he apparently wasn't funny anymore.
Do we know any comedians like that now? Yeah. I could name a few. Their grievances take over, but people still love them.
That's one thing about Carlin. He would do political stuff, and yet he still was...
He was always funny.
I didn't write down his name in the credits, but I do not want to forget to talk about the black guy. What is his name again?
Ben Vereen.
Right, and he's playing a version of... What'd you say he was? Because his name is O'Connor Flood. And you thought he was playing...
I think he's supposed to be Sammy Davis Jr.
Right, yes.
He's got that ham-fisted entertainer, hey, and they're making fun of him. Actually, I love this little gag that they keep coming back to. It's like, one of my best friends, a great humanitarian, and they can just read it along because it says the same thing about literally everybody until the end when he's introducing Joe, and he's like, I hate this guy, he's a terrible human. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that makes me say Sammy Davis Jr. for real is because he's wearing several necklaces, and one of them is the Star of David.
And Sammy was Jewish.
Yeah. All those pieces together makes me think, in that time, in the late 70s, I think that's pretty much what Sammy Davis Jr. was doing, right?
Sounds about right. And it's his variety show where Joe's last performance in his own head does take place. I think I'm gonna die.
Incredible. I'm gonna die. The costumes, everything. Oh.
You know the best thing in this whole movie, though? The single best thing is the very last thing. Because all that's fun, and you know he's dying. Yeah. You see him go down covered in sweat. He's gliding down the hall about to meet Angelique, but the last thing is bang, smash cut to him being zipped up in a body bag.
And then there's no business like show business.
Yeah. So I think that's the best thing in the whole film is the very end.
Oh, yeah.
Another thing, by the way, to mention about influences, because 8.5, of course, is a big one. And if I didn't say this, we covered it last year. Another film we covered, and a Best Picture winner from 10 years ago, Birdman, has a fair amount of similarities, too.
Yes.
Not quite as negative, and that's certainly a fun and funny film.
But that same energy, too, right? And that same feverish creativity with guts and daring, bold choices.
And complicated relationships with a girlfriend, an ex-wife, and a daughter.
Yes.
So Roy Scheider, we've covered in The French Connection, Jaws, Marathon Man, and also he's in 2010 with John Lithgow. They have actual scenes together. I don't think they're ever on camera together in this. If they are, it's very briefly, but in that, they're in a lot of scenes together. I mentioned Keith Gordon as the young Joe, Jessica Lange, of course. The one film we'd ever covered before this one was Tootsie. She won an Oscar for that, and that was a long time ago that we did cover that. Lithgow is In Terms of Endearment, Footloose, we just covered that a few months ago, and Shrek, and then 2010 with Scheider. Whatever her last name is, however you say it, Anne Rien King, I don't know, I should have looked it up. She's actually, or was actually a singer, was only in 4 movies, but one of them was Annie, another musical, in 1982.
That's right.
And guess who directed Annie? John Huston.
No kidding.
Who I just talked about maybe 25 minutes ago. Leland Palmer, this was her last movie. She plays Audrey, the ex-wife. She only made a few films, but did plenty of TV in the 70s especially. David Margulies was the mayor in Ghostbusters. He's in this. You already talked about... Wally Shawn, who's, I think now, the 5th movie we've covered him. He's barely in this, but he was in The Princess Bride and Manhattan, and I didn't write them all down. I forget now. But he's been in a lot of things. Max Wright, we see him quite a bit in this movie. He's the dad in Alf, Willie. Did other things too, but especially that. And Cliff Gorman, he's Davis Newman. Oh, yeah, he's the
stand-up
Lenny
comic.
Bruce guy, basically, yeah. He mostly did television. But the last actor I have to mention, because I love saying this name, I know it's not actually this, but when I first saw this, I thought it was, so I got to say, Chooch Pounder. She'll always be Chooch to me.
CCH Pounder.
It actually stands for...
And I looked up, CCH do stand for her
Catherine
3 names. Yeah.
something, and then I think it's Hilaria, Alec Baldwin's wife.
That's
Same
right,
name, so it's something Hilaria. This was her debut. She's the nurse, of course, the black nurse that's towards the end of the film. One of the movies she's in, beyond this one, though, for us, Avatar. I forget who she is in Avatar. Maybe she's one of the Na'vi, but she was in that. Talked about Fosse's credits already. He wrote this, and he wrote Star 80. He wrote this with the producer, Robert Allen Arthur, who died before this came out.
What?
So he was mentioned in some of the Oscar speeches because he had already died, I think during the production, in fact, which is what happened on Ben-Hur. The producer died before the movie was even done, that huge production. William Wyler had to basically be his own producer. Maybe he already was a producer, but he had to be the producer because the guy died making a big movie like that. And this was the only movie that Arthur ever produced, by the way. He was more of a TV guy. The movie's 185-1. We watched, as you said, the Criterion DVD that we got from the Toronto Public Library, and it played beautifully. No problems at all. No skipping, no issues whatsoever. And it looked pretty good. Giuseppe Rotuno, according to one of the guys who won an Oscar for the sets, that's how he said his name, he shot Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, which I covered months ago. That's the one time I wanted to make sure to get a Sophia Loren movie on this podcast. But never worked with Fosse again, even though Fosse made, 2 more movies? Don't know if there's a problem there, but they didn't work together again. Talked about Alan Hyme plenty. He does play Eddie as well, so he's an editor in the movie working on the stand-up.
Yeah, he plays himself,
Effectively, yeah. He cut Network, another great edited movie that was edited very well. And he cut Hair the same year as this, the musical that Siskel had #1 on his top 10 list, and this wasn't on there at all in his top 10. Ralph Burns, who won 2 Oscars. One was for this, the other was for Cabaret, and he was always working with Fosse all 5 times, I believe, that Fosse made a movie. He was one of the composers. So the look, we know the cutting's great. Music, thoughts? Sets, the one for the sets. It was nominated for the costumes.
I know we did talk about the editing already, but I do just want to credit Fosse for pushing editing forward, for doing hard things and doing exciting things that were really innovative. I had 2 separate professors show me Bob Fosse films in our editing classes, and it's funny, I was thinking earlier today, if I was teaching editing class, I would definitely show them scenes from this movie, and what else would I show them? And I thought of Apocalypse Now, and now they're like, It's crazy that those films were up against each other at the Oscars. They're 2 of the greatest edited films of all time. I can't speak highly enough of what this meant. Although, if I was an editor back then, I would have hated this guy because this kind of stuff is so hard to do.
You wouldn't have slept. Well, can you imagine if Haim and Murch and the other editors on Apocalypse Now had non-linear editing? They'd never leave. Or the directors would never leave. Maybe they'd say, I'm learning how to use this, and you go home. I'm working all night long. He would tweak forever, like he does with the stand-up, but he would tweak even longer.
We've talked about how when non-linear editing became a thing...
Because, by the way, it's easier. That's what I'm saying, if people don't understand.
So much easier and faster. And you can just try something. And if you don't like it, try something else. And you can make those little changes so easily. And I know we talked about, when we talk about films that come from like the late 90s, which is when nonlinear editing had really been adopted and even the most low-budget film would have access to it. That's when you see all these creative leaps and bounds in editing. And you get films like City of God, which we covered. Another great example would be Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. These are low-budget films that want to be experimental and have the means to do something really exciting, fresh, because the technology allowed them to.
Run, Lola, Run, by the way.
Run, Lola, Run, an excellent example. Such a well-edited film. But so much respect is owed to Bob Fosse in that respect. You wouldn't think somebody who puts on plays, something that requires no editing, that you would also be one of the most innovative and creative and important directors in that regard. But it comes down to rhythm.
Yeah.
I think he understands rhythms and motifs and how to bring the end to the beginning and vice versa. The way that he does that, it's incredible. He has such an instinct for it.
Well, he's a Renaissance man, or at least was a Renaissance man, so he can do so many different things. Some people are great at everything. If they give it a try, they'd probably be great at macrame or hitting a baseball.
Part of the reason, as we see in this film, that he's great at everything is because he's a relentless perfectionist to the point where he drives everybody and himself crazy.
And puts himself in the grave. Working so hard. What happens next? Well, Mr. Gideon goes up that same escalator we see in Soul, the animated film, Pixar movie. So he gets to hang with Jamie Foxx. Plus, since Fox's character was named Joe, then Joe, meet Joe. Although Joe does come back to Earth at the very end of that film. Another chance. But he'll go back. We all will. We each owe a death. What's that line? Green Mile, they say that. There are no exceptions. We all owe a death. It's just how you got there. This is not a happy man. He died doing what he maybe not loved, but had to do. I still have some respect for that, even if it is a matter of it being an addiction, just like the smoking, the drinking, the Dexedrine every single day. He's addicted to a lot of things, and one of them is to working and not stopping. Yeah, don't let the voices in your head go nuts. And if you're in a hospital, that's one of the easiest things to have happen. If you're somebody that needs drugs and everything to get through, and now you can't do that because, well, not those kinds of drugs. You have other drugs, I guess, in a hospital. But one of the big things would be it's so quiet.
Before we wrap it up, I do want to mention it's interesting that there's only one true flashback in the film that happens before, you'd say, the film begins, when he's starting the musical and working on the film. The only flashback is him as like a 13-year-old. Was he Jewish? Was Bob Fosse Jewish?
I don't know.
It almost seems like he's studying for the bar mitzvah or something. But anyways, he's backstage, and he gets what I think we would all call a sexual assault. Backstage, he's like doing burlesque, and he goes on stage, and he has ejaculated on himself, and he gets massively humiliated. The thought that Fosse, of all of his childhood recollections, this is the only one that he puts in there. And then we see that he has serious sex addiction issues, and he's running away from some kind of demons. They don't make a huge deal of that connection. It might be connected to the things he experienced as a young performer. Yeah. I mean, ask any child star what they went through. This could just be one little snapshot of all kinds of things that he experienced back then.
I didn't pick up on that. I didn't remember that part. I should have, I guess. Looking through to see if he's Jewish, I can't find evidence of that. But here's an interesting bit of trivia. He got the Academy Award for directing Cabaret in 1973, because it was a 1972 movie. He won the Tony for directing Pippin, and he won an Emmy Award for directing Liza with a Z. And I guess he's the only director to win all three of those in the same calendar year.
Yeah, that's right. In the same year. He didn't EGOT because he never had a Grammy. But how crazy that he won those three things in 1 year. And still also, not satisfied, though.
Right. Of course not. And he was separated from Gwen Verdon in the 70s, but he was still married to her until his death. Oh, and that also makes me think of Spencer Tracy. He was married to his wife until I think he died because he was a Catholic or whatever. But he was with Katharine Hepburn for 27 years or something like that. But they never got married because he never divorced the other wife. So it looks like the guy was married to somebody for decades, but he wasn't really with her for most of that time, in his case or in Fosse's case. All right, then last thoughts on all that jazz.
Just super grateful that there are these people out there that can take these massive leaps and create something so exciting and thought-provoking. I may not totally get it, but this movie makes me feel things. I'll probably never watch it again all the way through, but 100% I'm going to be revisiting some of my favorite scenes.
So many people, especially famous people, say they wouldn't change anything they did in their career, and I assume they mean in their life. I always think that's crap. I certainly don't feel that way. And I think Joe might change a lot of things if he could. I wonder if Fosse himself felt that way, considering he put it in this movie. But this guy seems like, as we've been saying, he has a lot of regrets. It's not, oh, I wouldn't change a thing. Then you're not human. I don't buy that. I think that's a crock when people say that. In any case, this is a good movie, and it's a very impressive production, for sure. Scheider's pretty solid. The other actors are good. The women do a great job. They all are great dancers. We know that. They can sing. But it just leaves me cold. I don't know why. I should have been more caught up on the story of a middle-aged man dying, but I wasn't really. Not that I'm dying, but I'm closer to that than I was 10, 15 years ago. I've seen this 2 or 3 times. That's probably enough. And I brought this on myself, but I don't know why I chose to cover 2 depressing musicals in the span of 10 days, because I reviewed A Star is Born back on the 15th. And I'll say what I said in that podcast. Bradley Cooper's version is, I think, far better than the George Cukor one in the 50s.
Now, the Bradley Cooper just needs to remake All That Jazz.
But Chicago, not the same thing, but Chicago, I think, is way better than this.
It's a very different movie. Even though they're both Fosse related, obviously. It's kind of apples and oranges.
True, but I like it more. So that was how we saw All That Jazz. I'll have another show for you crazy cats on Friday. I'll be doing a monologue about the 1939 Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Charles Laughton one. And when Bev is back in front of a microphone in 7 days, it will be December, and she and I will be throwing it back and forth about Douglas, Turner, and DeVito and the War of the Roses. The coming attraction is trivia for The War of the Roses. We've only covered Kathleen Turner a few times over the years, including once this year. But Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito have both come up several times in the history of our podcast. Taking producing into account, they've both been producers for a long time, which of the two guys has been in more films or been involved in more films that we have reviewed on this channel? Don't look it up. It'll take you too long. I'll just tell you next week.
Okay. I was like, Oh, this is going to be so hard to figure out, especially when you take producing into account. All right, so for the answer to that question for me as well, check out next week's podcast about War of the Roses. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes, and they're available for free. While you're there, leave us a rating and a review. That's a great way to support us. We are both on Twitter. I am at Bev Ellis Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email. Have you ever seen podcast at gmail.com. You can also find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES, and that will get you a 20% discount.
2 last factoids before we wrap. Fosse was born in Chicago, so that makes sense. Great musical is made about his hometown. And also it says on Wikipedia he was a Norwegian American, or his father was at least, and an Irish American mother.
Okay, so I was wrong. I don't know what language he's speaking backstage that he doesn't want the showgirl to know about, but it's not Hebrew.
Well, zip me up, both my chest and my body bag. I'm done. It's no longer showtime, folks.
And cut!